All right, let's go out on the Western Pizza guest hotline and we'll say Merry Christmas to this filthy animal. He's been on the show before. He covers the CFL real well, except when he picks against the Riders. He covers the Flames from the Fan 960 in Calgary. Pat Steinberg. Pat, how are you? Happy holidays. How are things?
Happy holidays, Maz. I'm good, buddy. How are you?
Well, not bad. So, Pat, first of all, I want to start with when you and I worked together, we worked at a company, and they were very big on employee engagement. You were always rating yourself and you were planning these strategic plans. And then at the end of the year, you got to rate your boss, and kind of everybody had a report card. And I remember giving some of those report card grades for some of the people we used to work with. This week, the CFL comes out with report cards. First of all, did you like the idea that the players got a chance to speak up and talk about what it's like being in the league?
I mean, I loved it. I actually wonder if that's something that we see a little more of going forward, honestly. Like, I wonder if other players' associations, because it was the CFLPA that was the one that decided to do this. They were the ones that decided to go about this and then release them. And so I'm wondering, like, if you're the NHLPA or if you're, the Players Association in Major League Soccer, or like, I wonder if other Players Association starts to look at this and say, well, hold on a second, this isn't a bad idea. This might put some pressure on some teams. Now, other collective bargaining agreements in other leagues are a little bit more full of teeth than maybe the one that the CFL and the CFLPA have. But I'd be really curious to see. So I loved it. I thought it was a really good indication as to what players think of their certain situations and what players think about their accommodations. And it was interesting to see some of the teams that didn't get good grades, some of the teams that did get grades. Like you'd maybe be a little surprised to see some of the teams that graded really well, and in some other areas, maybe some teams that don't grade so well. And I think it has the potential to do exactly what they're looking at, Maz. Like, I think that, if your team scored really low from the Players Association on team travel or, the diet and nutrition or how they treat friends and family, those types of things, I think that stuff makes a difference when it's all said and done. And I wonder if, it doesn't spur on some changes at the end of the day.
So Edmonton scored the lowest, and that's not really a surprise. With the dumpster fire they've been for the past multiple years under Chris Jones, that's not hard to see. The one that kind of jumped out and surprised me, because the owner is rich. I mean, when you can afford the Jonas Brothers, you should be able to afford anything. The BC Lions scored very low on a lot of stuff, like the nutrition, like some of the facility stuff, things that can be easily cured by money. Did that BC one jump out at you at all as far as maybe a bit of a surprise?
Yeah, a little bit. And even the two that maybe surprised me a little bit in terms of the grades and where they ended up scoring, I was a little surprised by BC because of how much money that owner has behind him. And then the other one was Winnipeg. I was expecting maybe the Bombers to be a little bit higher and score kind of. I expected to see a lot of A's and B pluses, and I thought that the Bombers might be the team that we're coming away with as the class of the CFL in a lot of these areas, and it's not like they scored horribly or anything like that, but maybe not as high as I thought. So I thought maybe the Bombers scored a little less high than I thought they would. I thought BC scored way lower than I thought they would. I wasn't surprised by the two Alberta teams. I know how the Stampeders are viewed right now. I know how the Elks are viewed right now. Maybe thought the Riders, knowing it's similar to Winnipeg, kind of Sask and Winnipeg are the two kind of class of the CFL teams when it comes to what they're getting and how they're drawing. And players wanted to be there, and the goal is only to win every single year, and there is no other goal. So I thought those two teams maybe might score a little higher, but again, I didn't think they scored poorly. But what I think was also really telling was that there weren't a lot of A's around the league. Like, it wasn't like any of these teams came away. It's not like there was like, oh well, this team A+ in terms of this or that. I mean, there was not a lot of that, which I guess for a league that is a little bit lower income compared to the major professional leagues. I guess that shouldn't be overly surprising, but maybe I was a little surprised. I thought we might see a couple of organizations score really, really well.
Well, and probably the one that jumped out at me. Now, here's the thing. We like to be very judgmental here in Rider Nation because, Toronto, how are they still around? There's 300 fans at the game. They actually surprisingly scored very well from the players. So it's maybe what we see out from the outside and our prejudice, but from the players on the inside, it all kind of graded out. Now, I'm not sure if that's the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment influence or not, but anyways, there was some breaking news from the Stamps about an hour ago. Jalen Philpott has re-signed for 2 more years with the Stampeders. Now, the Stamps, admittedly, Pat, a gong show the past couple of years, not exactly Stampeder-esque. Do you like the coaching staff that they assembled and that they announced earlier this week?
I'm interested by it. I'm interested by a lot of the former players on that staff, former Stampeder players on that staff. It's interesting because, you don't usually see a head coach survive while the rest of his, in the NHL, it's assistants, in the CFL and football, it's coordinators. We saw Mark Killam and Brent Monson, and those two guys were blown out in Calgary, but Dave Dickinson remained as head coach and general manager. You don't see that happen all the time. So I was a little interested by that when we saw that news come out initially. And now that they have filled out their coaching staff, I'm interested in it for sure, because I do think there are some interesting names and some interesting former players that you're always interested to see how they make the jump and make the transition to coaching. But make no mistake, this is Dave Dickinson's team. This is going to be how Dave wants the team to run. They've got a lot. They've got some significant areas they need to improve upon. This team in Calgary has been looked upon as one of the class of the CFL for so long. And even while, maybe the overall record and the results were starting to take some steps back, one thing you could always count on is that defensively, whether it was under Brent Monson or prior defensive coordinators, you knew that defensively this team was going to be one of the best in the CFL. Well, that even took a step back in 2024, and their defensive unit was nowhere near the same group that it had been in the past, and they couldn't get a stop, and there were nights where they were getting lit up through the air, or they couldn't stop the run, and so I do think that I get why change was needed, and the Stampeders have gone through more change this offseason than we've seen in a long time. Coaching staff and a significant quarterback move. We'll see what other personnel moves are made here over the next number of months as we move towards free agency, and I'm curious to see how active and aggressive Dave Dickinson is in free agency, especially on the offensive side of the ball with Vernon Adams Jr. in the fold now. So yeah, I'm intrigued by the coaching staff when you've got a lot of new faces being put in situations where maybe they haven't had a lot of experience in. I'm always curious to see how it plays out, but I do think there's no doubt that it's a fresh coaching staff. And for a team that has definitely gotten a little stale, you can always see positive in things being a little fresh.
It's Pat Steinberg joining us on the Western Pizza Guest Hotline here on the all-new SportsCage Friday edition as we get set for the Christmas vacation. We had, let's see, the other day we had, oh man, why am I blanking here? Let's see. Oh, we had Charleston Hughes on the show, and he said one of the things that he felt bad for Jawan Simpson, who was the D-line coach. Jawan Simpson's a linebacker, and he thinks that what John Bowman is going to bring to the Stamps D-line this year defensively could be one of the difference makers in how the staff is assembled, because John Bowman is a D-lineman through and through. And he said Simpson was put in a tough spot. When you're a linebacker, that's not your natural position to coach the D-line. So he thought some of the pieces were potentially out of place, where he thinks now they're more in place. The Vernon Adams Jr., you saw this a couple of weeks ago. We saw it on social media. They had him out all over Calgary at all the different spots and the pictures and the photo ops, and they had him at the Flames game, and they had the jersey in the locker room and dressed and all that. So the hype and the hoopla is over. What do they have to surround him with to have success? Is it receivers? Is it the O-line? Like where does Dave Dickens have to keep this thing on the rails so Big Play VA is the MOP like early last season and not the interception machine like he was at the end of the year when he finally got a chance to play?
And I mean, it's tough to put. It's tough for me to judge what we saw at the end of the year for VA, the way that he was jerked around in BC. Like, I think you can almost throw that completely out the window, Maz, because he did get jerked around. He got hurt. He was the clear-cut MOP before he got hurt in week 8 or whatever it was. And then, okay, they go out and they sign Nathan Rourke, I guess, and give him the biggest contract in CFL history. I guess, okay. But then as BC's season is falling apart and the discontent in the locker room is getting louder and louder and the groundswell for get VA back under center gets louder and louder and they keep Rourke. You want to talk about an interception machine? That's what Nathan Rourke was as he was starting this year. And they probably waited, 4 or 5 weeks too late to get VA back in, and then it was too late. They didn't have a chance, and their playoff positioning got all jerked around. So I guess I just find it hard to put too much weight on what we saw from VA in his final couple of starts of the season. But what we saw from him in the first half of the season was just a continuation of what we saw from him last season when he was the full-time starter in BC. So what does he need in Calgary? Well, I think kind of in a lot of ways, all of the above. The offensive line really struggled both on the side of injuries and just overall performance. So I think that they're going to need to augment on their front five and also stay healthy on the offensive line. That's going to be massive for Vernon Adams to be the guy that we know he can be. And I'm fascinated on the receiving side of things. I really am. You know, a guy that, this comes from no inside knowledge at all. Like, it's not like I'm trying to it's not like I'm trying to say, oh, watch out for this. But I am fascinated by Vernon Adams. One of the first comments he made everywhere in his news conference and the round of media that he did around Calgary was, he's a top recruiter, and I am fascinated to see what that means for big-time playmakers being signed in free agency. And, you know, Reggie Begelton's under contract. There's a big-time playmaker for VA to work with, but I wonder in a big way about Justin McInnis, because here's one of the top 2 or 3 free agents available. And, you know, he's after the season he had in BC, he's going to be expecting big money. They've already got big money that is that is already committed to whether it's Keon Hatcher or now I'm slipping on names, but they've got 2 receivers that they've got big money already committed to. So if you're Justin McInnis, who is the breakout player in BC this year and the breakout player potentially around the league, yeah, I think that you're in a situation. Alexander Hollins, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And so they've got a guy like McInnis where they might be far apart on money when it's all said and done. Well, where did Justin McInnis have his biggest success? When Vernon Adams Jr. was throwing him the football. So I wonder if Calgary goes hard after him if he does indeed make it to free agency. And again, that comes with no inside knowledge. By no means am I a CFL insider, so I'm not sitting here saying that, oh, I'm hearing that they're far apart. I just wonder about McInnis because of the VA connection, because he's a free agent, because he's going to be demanding big money, and because BC already has big money committed to some receivers. So I mean, look, the Stampeders were dreadful last year on both sides of the football. They need help everywhere. They addressed the number one problem, and that was quarterback. And they addressed the number one need, and they brought in the number one available option. There was nobody close to VA available in free agency or via trade. It's one of the biggest acquisitions the Calgary Stampeders have ever made. I think you can make the argument it's the biggest trade the Stampeders have ever made. So, you know, you bring in a guy like that, you've got yourself a cornerstone for this year and next year. So build around him and bring in some big pieces. And I do think on the O-line and I do think at receiver, they could absolutely use some help.
It's the Friday edition of the all-new Sports Cage on the Western Pizza Guest Hotline. We're chatting with Pat Steinberg. One more with football before we shift to hockey. Have you watched any of the Aaron Rodgers documentary Enigma on Netflix yet?
Nope, and I can guarantee you I will not watch a single second.
Wow, no. He's a changed man. The ayahuasca trips, he's like a gentle soul up.
I can't deal with it. I just can't. So why willingly cause the aggravation? I just can't do it. I can't, and I won't. And there's like zero chance I watch a second of an Aaron Rodgers documentary.
Okay, well, I won't tell you about all 3 episodes I watched over the past 72 hours. Anyways, when you check the NHL standings today, do you know who is in the 8th and final playoff wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference? The pesky Ottawa Senators, who last night in town,
Indeed.
They pull out a gutsy overtime win against the Calgary Flames. Let me get this right. So Brady Tkachuk loses a tooth, gets 9 stitches, and scores the overtime winner. I know it's not a traditional Gordie Howe hat trick, but that's got to be somewhere close for some sort of like cliche award, should it not?
Well, give it the Brady Tkachuk hat trick, and not only that, but then he probably should have been called on a double minor high sticking right before the overtime winner when he took away a Jonathan Huberdeau opportunity, and Jonathan Huberdeau, because he got high sticked in the mush, goes head first or body first into the end boards. He's out of the play. That leads to the 2-on-1 the other way with Stützle on the left side. Dan Vladar made the initial stop, and then Brady Tkachuk was right there to poke home the rebound for the OT winner. He did a little bit of everything last night. I mean, the guy's unbelievable, though. And like, we've been calling his older brother Matthew a unicorn for years, ever since he broke into the NHL 8 years ago as a member of the Flames in 2016. And Matthew Tkachuk is and continues to be a unicorn. But I think his brother might be even more on the unicorn side of things with the way that he can impact hockey games, the way that he can impact things offensively, the way that he can, like, he's a more physical player than Matthew is, and that's always been really interesting to me. The juxtaposition. I think Matthew's a slicker player than Brady is, but Brady is a more physical, hard-nosed type player. They both get under the skin of opposing teams. They both have that emotional part of them that can sometimes get them in trouble. They're both natural-born leaders, but they're different players and they're unicorns in different ways, and that's the 16th goal of the season for Brady Tkachuk. Like, he's on pace for somewhere in the 40 to 50 range as he just continues to grow more and more out of his shell. And don't look now. That Senators team has been nothing for the longest time. But with Brady Tkachuk and Drake Batherson and Tim Stützle and Jake Sanderson and Linus Ullmark, who they acquired from Boston in the offseason, playing like a Vezina Trophy quality goalie again. He's now made 7 straight starts. Not 7 straight starts, but in his last 7 starts, rather, he's won all of them. He's allowed 7 goals combined in those 7 starts, 2 shutouts, and 7 straight games with allowing 2 goals or fewer. So you add Linus Ullmark, who looks like Linus Ullmark, and the guy that won the Vezina Trophy a couple of years ago with Boston. You've got Brady Tkachuk as the captain, who continues to get more and more of a foothold on that team. And you've got some really, really good, skilled players and important pieces around him. Steve Staios, the general manager, is not going to rest on his laurels. The Sens have been also-rans and out of the playoffs for too long, so you can almost take to the bank the Senators will add on their blue line in a big way between now and the trade deadline. They're in a playoff spot. They've won 5 in a row. They probably were the second-best team on the ice last night against Calgary, but when you've got the superior skill, you can pull out games a lot of the time in that situation.
I can't say that I've ever met an Ottawa Senators fan, but if there are some out there and they're listening, I do feel your pain, because success and the Ottawa Senators don't necessarily go together in the same sentence. So to be hopeful is one thing. I can't imagine without Brady Tkachuk. Could you imagine how bad that hockey team would be? So you'd mentioned Boston. You mentioned Linus Ullmark, and that's where he came from. Last night, Boston, they end up losing 3-2 to the Oilers. And a lot of people over the past few weeks really giving it to the Bruins about how they're being managed and stuff, and a bit of a gong show and how they handled Jeremy Sway. And when all is said and done, and after what we saw them do to the Flames the other night, Boston's still got a really good hockey team. And as long as you have guys like a David Pastrnak on your roster and a Jeremy Swayman, they're okay. They're not what I think what the media makes them out to be.
They've made their coaching change, which has changed things dramatically. I think they're now 9-4-1 since Joe Sacco took over for Jim Montgomery. So they've definitely turned the corner there. And so a lot of times you make the coaching change and you see an uptick, and I think we've seen that. But their overall game has been significantly better and different since the coaching change was made. But here's the scary part. The Bruins are sitting in a playoff spot. They're fighting for an Atlantic Division spot, and they're on a wild card spot right now. And they've done that by Elias Lindholm, their big free agent forward signing, scoring 5 goals, for David Pastrnak for a good chunk of the season looking like a shadow of his former self. Like, you don't see David Pastrnak double clutch on open shots, and yet he's doing that nonstop these days. And you've got Jeremy Swayman, who's been a very, very below average goalie after being one of the best in the NHL last year. And so you combine all those things, and for the Bruins to still be in a playoff spot is pretty impressive. And it also, I think, if you're another Eastern Conference team, you're a little worried about inevitably when Pastrnak starts playing like the 50-goal scorer we know he can be, and when Swayman's game, after not having any of training camp, returns to the form as opposed to being a sub-900 goaltender, he returns to being a 915 goalie on his save percentage. And Brad Marchand's points pick up a little bit, and Elias Lindholm starts scoring on a 20 or 30 goal pace. And I'm not saying these things are all guaranteed to happen, but we know what each of these players is capable of, and they've all played a little bit below expectation and capability. Like, what happens if those guys start figuring it out? Yeah, that's a scary prospect for the rest of the Eastern Conference. And so I think that there is definitely a possibility that we see the Bruins make a little bit of a move in the Eastern Conference standings. They're still a good team. They've still got really nice depth. They maybe don't have their superstar center like they used to in Bergeron, but they've got good personnel on the back. We know what Swayman can be between the pipes, and they've got a group of forwards that is very deep, and I think that they're going to be a really interesting team to watch in the second half of the season.
All right, Capo Caco got shipped to Seattle from the Rangers. I don't think he was the problem. So tomorrow afternoon, the Chicago Blackhawks come to Calgary to take on the Flames. In your opinion, and we'll wrap on this, is Connor Bedard underachieving in year 2, right where you think he would be? Or, well, we know he's not exactly lighting it up. Where are you on the Connor Bedard year 2? As we're, 30-ish games in.
We have 33 in and well below expectations, like significantly below expectations. So Bedard had 61 points in 68 games last year as a rookie, and he is well below that this year. Like, he's on pace for fewer points this year than what we saw from him last year. And so if I'm the Blackhawks, I'm a little worried about what we're seeing in year 2. Like, this is the year that, if you're a superstar, a lot of times you take that jump from being in and around point per game to being in and around 90 and 100 points. Like, that's what we saw from McDavid from year 1 and year 2, right? He went from, just over a point per game in his first year to being a 100-point player as a sophomore. And so we're seeing a step back from Bedard. That's a little worrying. Now, that team around him is junk. They went out to try to add a lot of good veterans, and I think chose a lot of the wrong guys that have not really helped them. But, Bedard can't win a face-off, and he isn't shooting it as much, and he's not as dangerous looking. It just has not been the sophomore season I was expecting from him. I was expecting Bedard to go from being like in the point per game range last year to being in the 90-point range this year as a sophomore, and we're seeing it go the other way. Now, that's not to say it won't happen, and he's not going to become that guy, because I'm quite confident that he is. I just wasn't expecting a step back in year 2. I was expecting both him and the Blackhawks to take a step forward, and it's kind of gone the other way. I mean, Chicago is kind of an unmitigated disaster this year. Again, you weren't expecting them to be a team that fought for a playoff spot necessarily, but I didn't think you expected them to be so clearly one of the worst teams in the NHL. I think you were expecting them to take a slight step forward, and that is not what they have done this year.
Well, tomorrow's one of those games for the Calgary Flames if they're going to keep the slim playoff chances alive, and they're just, what are they, a point out of a wild card? These are the types of games that they have to win, that they cannot lose. As you, I know there's a lot of proud Flames fans, and yesterday was a big day in Flames history. It was 29 years ago yesterday, I believe, Pat, that the Joe Nieuwendyk for Jerome McGinley trade happens. And it's so funny. When you see Jerome and that giant smile but when the lights were on and on the ice, when that switch flipped, Jerome was the hardest player to play against, if you ask me, in the National Hockey League. When you see this, like, don't wake up, don't poke the bear, because once you poke the bear, there was no way you could stop him. So it was kind of neat to see some of the stuff on the game last night when they were talking about the Jerome of the good old days. Still one of the best fights in NHL history. Would you not agree? That 2004 Stanley Cup final, him and Vincent Lecavalier, just toe-to-toe going at it.
Tough to that entire run of him in that year's playoffs. One of the greatest runs I've ever seen, including the fights.
Yeah. He's it. All right. He's Pat Steinberg from SportsNet 960, The Fan in Calgary. He is also the host of Flames Talk Daily, and he is part of Flames Radio tomorrow with the Blackhawks come to town. You'll be able to catch Pat in action. Hey, my man, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and watch your email, because I will be emailing you a Netflix gift card that is specifically for watching the Aaron Rodgers Enigma documentary only. You won't be able to watch any other shows like Monday Night Raw. It's not going to be good for that. It's Aaron Rodgers only. Either that or I'm going to rip a DVD version for you and we'll put it in the mail. Merry Christmas, my friend. Thanks for doing this.
See you, Maz. Good stuff, buddy.